My name is Angelina Lawrence, and at 29 years old I was just 5 days away from what I thought would be the happiest day of my life, marrying Marcus Sterling, the man I had loved for 3 incredible years. Everything seemed perfect until his prestigious family cornered me with a devastating ultimatum that would either force me to surrender my dignity or walk away from the altar. What they didn't know was that behind my humble librarian facade lay a carefully guarded secret worth $12 million and the steel backbone inherited from generations of strong women. Their condescending smiles were about to meet the shock of their privileged lives. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and if you love stories where the underestimated rise up, please like and subscribe. To understand how I reached this moment, you need to know who I really am beneath the mask they chose to see. I grew up in the small coastal town of Millbrook, Maine, where my mother worked as the head librarian at the public library and my father taught literature at the local high school. Our house was filled with books, classical music, and the kind of intellectual conversations that shaped my love for learning. We weren't wealthy by any measure. Every family vacation was carefully budgeted, and my clothes came from department store sales rather than boutiques. But we were rich in the things that mattered: love, respect, and an unwavering belief in the power of education. My parents instilled in me the importance of earning my own way in the world. When I expressed interest in studying at Columbia University, they made it clear that while they supported my dreams, I would need to fund them myself. I threw myself into academics with single-minded determination, earning a full scholarship that covered tuition and living expenses. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in art history and immediately began working toward my master's in library science. What my parents didn't know, what nobody knew except my grandmother's lawyer, was that my beloved Grandma Rose had left me far more than the small jewelry box and antique books everyone assumed comprised her entire legacy. Grandma Rose had been the daughter of Italian immigrants who built a small but incredibly successful import business in Boston during the 1940s. She had invested wisely throughout her life, living modestly while her portfolio grew exponentially. When she passed during my senior year of college, I inherited an estate worth $8.5 million. The inheritance came with a letter written in her careful handwriting. "My dearest Angelina, this money is not just numbers in an account, it represents the dreams and sacrifices of our family. Use it wisely, but more importantly, let it give you the freedom to choose love over convenience, principles over pressure, and authenticity over acceptance. Never let anyone make you feel small because they don't know your worth." I took her words to heart. Instead of announcing my sudden wealth, I quietly invested most of the inheritance with the help of her longtime financial advisor, keeping only enough to pay off my student loans and start a small investment fund of my own. By the time I was 27, smart investments and a small tech startup I had funded had grown my net worth to $12 million. But I continued living as I always had, in a modest apartment, driving a reliable but unremarkable car, and working at the New York Public Library because I genuinely loved connecting people with knowledge and stories. I met Marcus at a charity auction benefiting literacy programs in underserved communities. I was there representing the library's educational outreach initiative, while he attended as part of the Sterling family's tradition of supporting worthy causes. The Sterling name was synonymous with old New York money. Their real estate empire had been built over 4 generations, and their influence extended into politics, finance, and high society. Marcus stood out immediately, not because of his tall frame and striking blue eyes, though those certainly caught my attention, but because he was actually reading the descriptions of the educational programs rather than just writing checks to impress other attendees. When the auction ended, he approached me to ask more about our literacy programs, and our conversation stretched well past midnight as we talked about everything from the digital divide in education to our shared love of obscure historical novels. Our first date was coffee at a small bookshop cafe in Greenwich Village, where Marcus confessed he had researched our library's programs and was genuinely impressed by the innovative approaches we were taking to serve our community. That was Marcus all over: thoughtful, genuine, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who had grown up with every privilege money could buy. We were inseparable after that. Weekend mornings browsing used bookstores, evenings cooking dinner in my tiny kitchen while debating the merits of various authors, long walks through Central Park discussing everything from art to politics. He never made me feel inadequate about my modest lifestyle, and I never felt the need to reveal the financial security hidden in my investment accounts. We were simply two people building something beautiful together, and money seemed irrelevant to what we shared. Marcus worked as a sustainable development consultant, choosing meaningful work over the family real estate business, which had caused some tension with his parents but earned my deep respect. He was passionate about creating affordable housing solutions and spent his free time volunteering with organizations that helped first-generation college students navigate higher education. In him, I saw someone who understood that true wealth came from making a positive impact, not just accumulating assets. When he took me to meet his family after 6 months of dating, I got my first real glimpse of the world he came from. The Sterling estate in the Hamptons was breathtaking, a sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean, with manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. The house was filled with museum-quality art and antiques that spoke of generations of wealth and refinement. Margaret and Hamilton Sterling were the epitome of East Coast aristocracy. Margaret was all sharp cheekbones and carefully styled silver hair, dressed in clothes that whispered rather than shouted their expense. Hamilton carried himself with the casual authority of a man who had never questioned his place at the top of society's hierarchy. They were polite to me, certainly, but there was an underlying assessment in every interaction, as if they were trying to determine whether I was suitable for their carefully curated world. "So you work at the public library?" Margaret had said over dinner, her tone suggesting she found this quaint rather than admirable. "How lovely that you found a way to pursue your passion for books. Though I imagine the financial limitations must be challenging." "The work is incredibly fulfilling," I replied carefully. "There's something magical about helping people discover new worlds through literature." Hamilton nodded approvingly. "Public service is admirable, of course. Though I hope Marcus has explained that the Sterling family has certain expectations about financial stability in long-term relationships." The comment hung in the air like a warning, though Marcus either didn't notice or chose to ignore the implications. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but their message was clear. They saw me as a charming but financially unsuitable match for their son. Over the following months, as our relationship deepened, I noticed more subtle signs of their disapproval. Margaret would ask pointed questions about my student loans and whether my parents had been able to contribute to my education. Hamilton would make comments about the importance of prenuptial agreements in protecting family assets. They never said anything explicitly insulting, but their meaning was unmistakable. They viewed me as a potential gold digger who might try to take advantage of their son's wealth. Rather than defend myself by revealing my own financial situation, I chose to let them maintain their assumptions. Part of me was curious to see how they would treat someone they perceived as beneath their station. Another part wanted to protect the authentic relationship Marcus and I had built, free from the complications that money so often brought to romance. And honestly, a small part of me enjoyed knowing that their condescension was based on completely false premises. Marcus seemed blissfully unaware of his parents' subtle hostility, or perhaps he had grown so accustomed to their controlling behavior that he no longer noticed it. He was the youngest of 3 children and had always been somewhat rebellious against family expectations. His older brother worked in the family business and had married a woman from another prominent real estate family. His sister had become a federal judge and married a senator's son. Marcus, choosing sustainable development work and dating a librarian, was already pushing against their carefully laid plans. When he proposed on our 2nd anniversary during a quiet evening in my apartment, surrounded by books and the soft glow of candles, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was his grandmother's, a stunning Art Deco sapphire that had belonged to the once sterling woman who had apparently married for love rather than social advancement. It felt like a good omen. Wedding planning began with the best of intentions but quickly revealed the fault lines that had been hidden beneath our happiness. Margaret had opinions about everything and the financial resources to make those opinions reality. She assumed, naturally, that the Sterling family would handle all major expenses because surely I couldn't afford the kind of wedding that would befit their family's status. Rather than correct this assumption, I allowed her to take control, telling myself it was easier than explaining my financial situation. The venue she selected was a historic mansion on Long Island that cost more for one evening than most people spend on their entire weddings. The flowers came from the most exclusive florist in Manhattan, and the catering was handled by a company that regularly served heads of state. With each decision, I felt myself becoming more of a spectator at my own wedding. When I suggested a smaller, more intimate ceremony, Margaret dismissed it as quaint but impractical given our social obligations. When I requested a particular photographer whose work I admired, she explained that they had already booked someone who understood the importance of capturing an event of this caliber. The only thing I insisted on was my dress. I had fallen in love with a simple but elegant gown from a boutique in Soho, beautiful, sophisticated, but not ostentatiously expensive. Margaret's response was telling. "Well, if that's what fits your budget, dear. Sometimes simpler is better when one has limitations to consider." Her patronizing tone made my teeth clench, but I held my tongue. Marcus tried to mediate when he noticed my frustration, sometimes supporting my preferences but often gently suggesting I compromise for the sake of family harmony. I found myself giving in more often than I wanted to, telling myself it was just one day and that afterward, Marcus and I would build our own life away from his parents' influence. As the wedding date approached, the subtle condescension became harder to ignore. Margaret would make comments about hoping I wouldn't feel overwhelmed by the guest list, which included senators, CEOs, and several members of families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. Hamilton offered to help me understand the financial disclosure forms required for the marriage license, clearly assuming I had little experience with complex financial matters. The breaking point came exactly 5 days before the wedding. I had just finished confirming details with the string quartet when my phone rang. Margaret's voice was honey-sweet but carried an undertone that immediately put me on alert. "Angelina, darling, I hope you don't mind, but Hamilton and I would like to speak with you this afternoon. Just a little chat to tie up some loose ends before the big day. Marcus will be in meetings all day with that housing project of his, so it will be just us girls and Hamilton." The phrase, "just us girls and Hamilton," should have been my first warning, but I was exhausted from wedding preparations and running on too little sleep and too much coffee. I agreed to meet them at their Upper East Side penthouse, thinking it might be a chance to finally connect with my future in-laws on a more personal level. I should have known better. The Sterling penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a pre-war building overlooking Central Park, its windows offering a view that probably cost more per month than most people's annual salaries. I was greeted not by Margaret herself but by their housekeeper, who led me to Hamilton's study, a room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of important business decisions. Margaret and Hamilton were already seated, both dressed as if for a board meeting rather than a family conversation. Margaret wore a navy suit that probably cost more than a semester of college tuition, while Hamilton was in his usual power uniform of charcoal gray with gold cufflinks that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Angelina, thank you for coming on such short notice," Margaret said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Please have a seat. We have some important matters to discuss." I settled into the chair across from them, suddenly feeling like I was facing a job interview rather than a family chat. The formal atmosphere was completely at odds with the casual tone of Margaret's phone call. "We wanted to speak with you before the wedding festivities begin in earnest," Hamilton said, getting straight to the point in his lawyer's manner. "There are certain business matters that need to be addressed when someone marries into the Sterling family." My stomach dropped. I had hoped against hope that Marcus's family would be different, that their wealth wouldn't come with the kind of controlling strings I had seen in other prominent families. But the predatory look in their eyes told me I had been naive. "What kind of business matters?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. Margaret reached for a leather portfolio beside her chair and extracted a thick document bound in navy blue. She slid it across the polished surface of Hamilton's desk toward me with the practiced motion of someone who had done this before. "This is a prenuptial agreement that our family attorney has prepared," she said smoothly. "It's simply a formality, but one that protects the interests of both families. I'm sure you understand the necessity." I stared at the document without touching it. This is the first I'm hearing about a prenuptial agreement. Marcus and I have never discussed this. "Marcus understands the family's position," Hamilton said dismissively. "He may not have wanted to burden you with the details, but he knows how these things work. Every sterling marriage for the past century has included appropriate legal protections." The casual way he dismissed my agency in my own marriage made anger flare in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. I picked up the document and began scanning its contents, my art history degree having given me enough experience with contracts and legal language to understand the basics of what I was reading. It was worse than I had imagined. The agreement essentially stated that in the event of divorce, I would receive a modest monthly allowance for a maximum of 5 years, regardless of the length of our marriage or any contributions I might make to our shared life. All property acquired during the marriage would remain with Marcus, and there were clauses about confidentiality that would prevent me from ever discussing the Sterling family's business affairs or personal matters. Most insulting of all were the sections that dealt with my own assets and income. The document assumed I had virtually nothing to protect and made patronizing provisions for my personal effects and professional materials, as if my entire life could be packed into a few boxes. "This seems rather one-sided," I said carefully, struggling to keep my voice level. Margaret laughed, a sound like crystal wind chimes in a hurricane. "Oh, darling, I think you're misunderstanding the scale we're dealing with here. The Sterling family assets represent generations of careful business development. We're talking about properties, investments, and business interests worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "And what about my assets?" I asked quietly. Hamilton's eyebrows rose in what might have been amusement. "Your assets? Angelina, we appreciate your work at the library, truly we do. Public service is admirable. But let's be realistic about the financial realities here. You're a librarian with student loans. Marcus is the heir to one of New York's most substantial fortunes. The disparity is rather significant." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. In their minds, I was a nobody who should be grateful for the opportunity to marry into their family, regardless of the terms they imposed. "When would you need this signed?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "Today would be ideal," Margaret said, producing an expensive pen from her purse. "The wedding is in 5 days, and we prefer to have these matters settled well in advance of the ceremony." "I would need time to have my own attorney review this first," I replied. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Hamilton's expression hardened into the look of a man unaccustomed to having his authority questioned. "Your own attorney? Is that really necessary? Our family lawyer who drafted this is one of the most respected in New York. His expertise should be more than sufficient." "Sufficient for your family's interests, certainly," I said. "But as you've just pointed out, our interests may not be perfectly aligned." Margaret's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "Angelina, this is really quite standard. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "Then you won't object to giving me 48 hours to have it professionally reviewed," I countered. "I'm afraid we need this resolved today," Hamilton said firmly. "These matters can become complicated if left too long, and with the wedding so close, we prefer to avoid any unnecessary drama." The ultimatum was delivered with the casual authority of people who had never been told no. They sat back in their chairs, completely confident that I would cave under pressure rather than risk losing Marcus and facing the humiliation of a cancelled wedding. "Are you saying that my marriage to Marcus depends on signing this document today without legal counsel?" I asked, wanting absolute clarity about their position. Margaret's smile returned, cold as a January morning in Central Park. "What we're saying, dear, is that the Sterling family has certain non-negotiable expectations. Marcus understands this, even if he finds it difficult to discuss with you directly. If you truly love him, you'll understand as well. Sign it or there will be no wedding, Hamilton stated bluntly. We've invested considerable time and money in this event, but we'll cancel it if necessary to protect the family's interests. I looked from Hamilton's impassive business face to Margaret's smugly confident expression. They were absolutely certain of their power in this situation. In their minds, I was cornered, faced with the choice between signing away my rights or losing the man I loved and enduring the humiliation of a very public cancellation. They had no idea they were about to meet the granddaughter of Rose Benedetto, a woman who had built an empire from nothing and taught her family that respect was earned, not inherited. I stood up, gathering the prenuptial agreement. I need to discuss this with Marcus. Marcus is aware of our position, Margaret said dismissively. He may not have wanted to be the one to broach the subject, but he understands family obligations. That stung more than anything else they had said. The idea that Marcus knew about this ambush and had allowed it to happen made my chest tighten with hurt and anger. Nevertheless, I said, my voice gaining strength, I will speak with him before making any decisions. Hamilton stood as well, straightening his tie in a gesture that spoke of decades of intimidating people in boardrooms. You have until tomorrow morning, Angelina. 9 o'clock sharp. We'll expect either your signature or your decision to end this engagement. We do hope you'll make the sensible choice, Margaret added, her tone suggesting she had no doubt about what that choice would be. Marcus cares for you deeply, but family loyalty runs deeper than romantic attachment. It would be such a shame to put him in the position of having to choose. I nodded stiffly and walked toward the door, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. Never let anyone make you feel small because they don't know your worth. As I waited for the elevator, I heard Margaret's voice drifting from the still open door of the study. She'll sign. These middle-class girls always do when they realize what they stand to lose. Really, Hamilton, sometimes I think Marcus chooses these projects just to rebel against us. Hamilton's chuckle followed me into the elevator. At least this one seems trainable. Better than that artist he dated in college who had the audacity to suggest we were materialistic. The elevator doors closed on their laughter, but I was no longer the uncertain woman who had entered their penthouse an hour earlier. Something had crystallized in that moment, a clarity born from the combination of my grandmother's wisdom, my own hidden strength, and the righteous anger of someone who had been vastly underestimated. I drove home in a haze of fury and determination, calling my financial advisor from the car. Patricia, it's Angelina. I need an emergency meeting tomorrow morning at 7. And I'll need complete documentation of my entire portfolio, everything. Is everything all right? Patricia asked, concern evident in her voice. Everything's about to be, I replied. I'll explain tomorrow. My second call was to the one person who had known my secret from the beginning and would understand exactly what I was facing. Grandma Rose's lawyer was right about you, my best friend Sophie said after I explained the situation. You do have steel in your backbone. What are you going to do? I'm going to give the Sterling family exactly what they've been asking for, I said. The truth about who they're dealing with. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every condescending comment, every dismissive look, every moment when Margaret and Hamilton had made it clear they saw me as a charity case Marcus was nobly rescuing from obscurity. By morning I had made my decision. I would not sign their prenuptial agreement, but neither would I simply walk away. If the Sterling family wanted to make this about money and power, it was time they learned that I had both. At 7 o'clock sharp, I sat across from Patricia Goldman, the financial advisor who had managed my grandmother's estate and helped me grow my inheritance into something that would have made Rose proud. Patricia was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when protecting her clients' interests. So, she said after I explained the situation, you want to reveal your financial position to counter a prenuptial agreement ambush. I have to say, Angelina, this is going to be quite a shock for them. She spread my portfolio across her conference table: bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds, and business valuations that told the story of careful wealth management and smart financial decisions. $12 million, Patricia said with satisfaction. Your grandmother would be proud. You've nearly doubled her legacy through wise investing and that brilliant move with the education technology startup. Looking at the numbers laid out in black and white, I felt a surge of confidence that had nothing to do with the money itself and everything to do with what it represented: my independence, my options, and my ability to meet the Sterling family as an equal rather than a supplicant. Now, Patricia continued, let's talk strategy. Do you want to save this relationship, or are you ready to walk away? It was the same question Sophie had asked, and I still had the same answer. I want to save it, but only if Marcus is willing to stand with me as a true partner. And only if his family learns to treat me with the respect I deserve. Patricia smiled the kind of smile that had probably terrified opposing lawyers for decades. Then we craft a counterproposal. A prenuptial agreement that actually protects both parties fairly and demonstrates that you're nobody's charity case. For the next 2 hours, we worked on creating a document that would protect my assets while being fair to Marcus's family interests. More importantly, we prepared the supporting documentation that would make my financial position absolutely clear. The presentation will be crucial, Patricia advised as we finalized everything. You want to be confident but not arrogant, firm but not hostile. Let the numbers speak for themselves. I left Patricia's office feeling armed for battle, but first I had to have the most important conversation of my life. I texted Marcus, we need to talk. Meet me at Café Lunar at noon. Just the two of us. His response came immediately, I'll be there. I love you. Those 3 words brought tears to my eyes. Despite everything his parents had done, despite the doubt and hurt clouding my heart, I still believed he meant them. The question was whether love would be enough to overcome the family dynamics that had shaped his entire life. Café Luna was where we had shared our first coffee date, a small bookshop cafe in Greenwich Village that felt like our place, removed from the Sterling family's influence and the world of wealth and privilege that had suddenly become a battlefield. I arrived early and chose a corner table away from other customers, spreading my portfolio carefully beside me like armor. When Marcus walked in at exactly noon, I could see the stress etched in every line of his face. His usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loose, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he had slept as poorly as I had. Angelina, he said, sliding into the seat across from me, relief evident in his voice. Thank God you wanted to meet. I've been worried sick since Mom said you seemed upset yesterday. I studied his face carefully, searching for signs of deception. Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you know your parents were planning to ambush me with a prenuptial agreement? The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. I knew they wanted a prenup, he said finally, his voice strained. It's standard in my family. But I told them I would discuss it with you myself when the time was right. And when exactly was the right time? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The morning of our wedding? I was going to bring it up after we got back from our honeymoon, he admitted. I thought it would be easier to discuss once we were married and you felt more secure in our relationship. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm. So you plan to present me with a legal document after we were already married? Marcus, do you hear how that sounds? He ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture I had once found endearing but now saw as a sign of his inability to handle difficult situations. I was trying to protect you from exactly what happened yesterday. I knew my parents would approach it like a business transaction rather than a conversation between family members. So instead you let them ambush me with an ultimatum 3 days before our wedding, I said. How is that protecting me? You're right, he said quietly. I handled this badly. I should have been upfront from the beginning, but I was scared you'd think I didn't trust you or that my family's money was more important to me than our relationship. His honesty was a small comfort, but it didn't address the larger issue. Marcus, have you actually read the prenuptial agreement your parents want me to sign? Another telling pause. Not in detail. Dad said it was the standard family template they use for all marriages. I slid the document across the table. Read it. All of it. Pay special attention to sections 3 through 7. Marcus opened the agreement and began reading, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he progressed through the pages. After about 15 minutes, he looked up with something approaching shock. "Some of this language is aggressive," he said carefully. "The confidentiality clauses alone are more restrictive than most corporate contracts I've seen." "Your parents presented this as protecting both families," I said. "What exactly does it protect about my interests?" Marcus flipped through the pages again, and I watched as the reality of his family's assumptions about me became clear. "It doesn't," he admitted. "It assumes you have essentially nothing to protect." "And that doesn't bother you?" He closed the document and met my eyes directly. "It bothers me tremendously. I never realized how one-sided it was because I trusted my parents to be fair. That was my mistake." I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, literally. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept private throughout our entire relationship." Confusion flickered across his face. "What do you mean?" I opened my portfolio and extracted the financial statements Patricia had prepared. "I'm not who your parents think I am. When my grandmother died during my senior year of college, she left me an inheritance. A substantial one." Marcus accepted the documents with a puzzled expression that quickly transformed to amazement as he scanned the numbers. $12 million, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Angelina, why didn't you ever tell me?" "For the same reason you don't lead every conversation by mentioning your trust fund," I replied. "I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have. I wanted genuine relationships based on shared values and mutual respect, not financial calculation." He was still processing the portfolio, turning pages with growing astonishment. "All this time, my parents have been treating you like a gold digger who couldn't possibly bring anything of value to their family," I finished. "Ironic, isn't it?" Marcus looked up at me, his expression a mixture of amazement, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Did you not trust me enough to share this?" The question I had been dreading, but one I owed him an honest answer to. "It wasn't about trust, Marcus. At first, it simply didn't seem relevant to who we were together. Then, as I got to know your family and saw how much emphasis they placed on wealth and social status, I became curious about how they would treat someone they perceived as beneath their station." "As a test," he said, a note of hurt entering his voice. "Not of you," I clarified quickly. "Never of you. But yes, in some ways it became a test of your family's character. And unfortunately, they failed it spectacularly." Our server approached to take our order, but we both waved him away. The conversation was too important to interrupt with mundane concerns like food. "I understand why you did it," Marcus said slowly. "But I can't help feeling like there's been a fundamental lack of honesty between us. I should have told you about the prenup expectations, and you should have told me about your financial situation." He was right, and I acknowledged it with a nod. "You're absolutely right. Complete transparency from the beginning would have prevented this entire situation. But we're here now, and we need to decide what comes next." I pulled out the second folder Patricia and I had prepared. "I've had my attorney draft a new prenuptial agreement. One that actually protects both of our interests fairly." Marcus opened the folder and began reading the balanced document Patricia had crafted. As a sustainable development consultant who regularly reviewed complex contracts, he quickly grasped the fairness of the terms compared to his parents' version. "This is completely reasonable," he said, looking up. "Equitable protection for both parties, fair terms for property division, clear language about intellectual property and business interests. This is what a prenuptial agreement should look like." "That's what I thought," I replied. "The question is, what are you willing to do about it?" Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to present this to my parents together. As a united front. It's time I stopped letting them treat our relationship like a business merger they need to approve. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by apprehension. They're not going to react well, especially your mother. Probably not, Marcus agreed. But their reaction will tell us everything we need to know about whether we can build a healthy relationship with them going forward. We spent the next hour strategizing our approach and discussing the boundaries we would need to establish with his family regardless of how they received our counterproposal. When we finally left the cafe, I felt reconnected to the man I had fallen in love with, not the heir to the sterling fortune, but Marcus himself, the idealistic consultant who chose meaningful work over easy money and was finally ready to choose our partnership over family pressure. That evening, we requested a meeting with his parents at their penthouse. Margaret's surprise was evident when Marcus called to ask for the appointment, clearly having expected me to arrive alone with a signed document. "Both of you?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of suspicion. "Is that really necessary? I thought Angelina would have made her decision by now." "We've made our decision together," Marcus replied firmly. "We'll see you at 7. We arrived at the Sterling penthouse dressed for battle, though our armor was subtle. Marcus wore his most expensive suit, the one his father had given him for college graduation, while I had chosen a sleek black dress that projected authority without seeming confrontational. My grandmother's pearl necklace rested at my throat, a talisman connecting me to the strong woman who had taught me never to accept less than I deserved. Margaret and Hamilton were waiting in the living room this time, a change from the intimidating atmosphere of the study. The room was decorated in shades of cream and gold, with windows overlooking Central Park and artwork that belonged in museums. It was beautiful but cold, much like its owners. "Marcus, darling," Margaret said, kissing her son's cheek while ignoring me entirely. "I do hope you've helped Angelina understand the importance of what we discussed yesterday." "Actually, Mom, Angelina has helped me understand several things," Marcus replied, his voice steady and determined. "We need to talk." Hamilton gestured toward the seating area. "Of course. Though I'm not sure what there is to discuss. The terms of the agreement are quite standard." We settled into chairs facing his parents, and I placed my leather portfolio on the coffee table between us like a declaration of war. "We've reviewed your prenuptial agreement," Marcus began, "and found it unacceptable in both its terms and its approach." Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Unacceptable? Marcus, this is the same agreement your brother and sister signed without any drama. My brother married an heiress and my sister married into political royalty," Marcus pointed out. "The power dynamics were entirely different." "Power dynamics?" Hamilton repeated dismissively. "This isn't sociology class, son. It's a practical legal document designed to protect family assets." I opened my portfolio and extracted the new prenuptial agreement, sliding it across the polished surface of the coffee table. "We agree that legal protection makes sense, which is why we've prepared an alternative agreement that protects both families' interests fairly." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stared at the document as if it might bite her, while Hamilton's lawyer instincts kicked in. "I'm sorry, but that's not how this works," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he probably used in boardrooms. "You don't get to rewrite the terms. You either accept our offer or decline it." "Actually, Dad, that's exactly how negotiation works," Marcus said. "And since we're talking about our marriage, Angelina and I are equal partners in this decision." I placed my financial portfolio on top of the new agreement. Perhaps this will help clarify why we felt the original document needed revision. Margaret reached for the documents first, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as she scanned the first page. Hamilton leaned over to read over her shoulder, and I watched as their assumptions about me crumbled in real time. "This can't be right," Margaret said, her voice lacking its usual confident tone. $12 million? But you work at the library. You drive that little Honda." "I value financial responsibility over flashy displays," I replied calmly. "And I work at the library because I love what I do, not because I need the income." Hamilton was examining the documents with his lawyer's eye, verifying account numbers and investment details. "These appear to be legitimate," he admitted reluctantly. "But why keep this information secret? It seems deliberately deceptive." "Would you have treated me differently if you had known?" I asked pointedly. The flush rising in Margaret's cheeks was answer enough. She had spent months making subtle digs about my financial limitations, and now faced the uncomfortable reality that I could probably buy and sell half their social circle. "This changes everything," Hamilton said, his lawyer's mind already recalibrating the situation. "We'll need to completely revise our approach." "Actually, it changes nothing about who I am or why I love your son," I corrected. "But it should change how you treat me." Marcus spoke up, his voice firm with newfound confidence. "Mom, Dad, the issue here isn't just the prenup. It's the complete lack of respect you've shown Angelina from day one. You made assumptions based on her job and background without bothering to know her as a person." "We were protecting you," Margaret protested, though her usual imperious tone had lost much of its power. "Family wealth attracts all sorts of opportunists." "Then perhaps you should have asked yourselves why someone with $12 million would be interested in your son's money," I said dryly. The new prenuptial agreement lay on the coffee table between us like a bridge across troubled waters. Hamilton picked it up and began reading with the careful attention he would give any important contract. "Some of these terms are quite sophisticated," he noted after several minutes. "Your attorney clearly understands complex asset protection." "Patricia Goldman," I said simply. "She's been managing my family's wealth for over 30 years. Recognition flickered in Hamilton's eyes. Patricia Goldman was legendary in New York financial circles, known for her brilliance and absolute loyalty to her clients. "Patricia Goldman agreed to represent you?" Margaret asked, clearly struggling to reconcile this with her image of me as a struggling librarian. "She's been my advisor since I inherited my grandmother's estate," I explained. "My grandmother trusted her completely, and she's never steered me wrong." Hamilton continued reading the prenuptial agreement, occasionally nodding at particularly well-crafted clauses. "This is actually quite fair," he said eventually, looking up with something approaching respect. "It protects both parties' assets while establishing reasonable terms for shared property and potential dissolution." "That's what a prenuptial agreement should do," Marcus said. "Protect everyone involved, not just one family's interests." Margaret was still processing the revelation of my financial status, her carefully constructed worldview cracking around the edges. "I may have misjudged certain aspects of your situation, Angelina," she said finally, the closest thing to an apology she was likely capable of offering. "We all made assumptions," I replied diplomatically. "Moving forward, perhaps we can base our relationship on who we actually are rather than who we thought each other to be." Hamilton closed the prenuptial agreement and set it down carefully. "We'll need our attorneys to review this, naturally, but I don't anticipate any major issues. The language is professional and the terms are equitable." "How long will that take?" Marcus asked. "A few days at most," Hamilton replied. "Though I suspect our lawyers will find this much more palatable than most prenuptial negotiations they handle." For the first time since we'd arrived, Margaret smiled, not her usual calculated expression, but something that seemed almost genuine. "I have to admit, Angelina, you've surprised us." "Completely." "Good surprises or bad ones?" I asked. "Impressive ones," she said. "I'm beginning to understand why Marcus was so determined to marry you despite our concerns." The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Where there had been condescension and manipulation, there was now a grudging respect and the beginning of something that might eventually become acceptance. "There's something else we need to discuss," Marcus said, his hand finding mine in a gesture of solidarity. "The way this entire situation has been handled is unacceptable. Springing a prenuptial agreement on Angelina 5 days before our wedding was manipulative and disrespectful." Hamilton had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We thought it was best to handle the matter efficiently." "By threatening to cancel our wedding if she didn't comply immediately?" Marcus challenged. That's not efficiency, Dad. That's coercion. Perhaps our approach was overly direct, Margaret conceded, though the admission clearly pained her. Going forward, I said, seizing the moment to establish boundaries, I hope we can communicate more openly. Marcus and I are partners, and any decisions affecting our marriage should be discussed with both of us together. Hamilton nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. The meeting concluded with tentative peace rather than outright victory, but it was progress. As we prepared to leave, Margaret surprised me by asking if I would join her for lunch the following week. I'd like to know more about your grandmother's story, she said. Building that kind of wealth while living modestly requires remarkable discipline and foresight. It was an olive branch, tentatively offered but significant nonetheless. Walking out of the Sterling penthouse hand in hand with Marcus, I felt lighter than I had in months. The secret I had carried for years was finally out, and the family dynamics that had threatened our relationship were beginning to shift in a healthier direction. How do you feel? Marcus asked as we waited for the elevator. Free, I said simply. For the first time since we started planning this wedding, I feel completely free to be myself. 3 days later, the revised prenuptial agreement was signed with minimal fuss. Hamilton's attorneys had found the document remarkably well crafted and suggested only minor language clarifications that didn't affect the substantive terms. Our wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with that perfect October light that made everything look like a painting. As I stood in the bridal suite at the historic mansion, wearing the dress I had chosen and loved, I felt at peace with both my decision to marry Marcus and my choice to finally reveal my true self to his family. Sophie was adjusting my veil when Margaret knocked on the door. She entered carrying a small velvet box, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. I brought you something, she said, opening the box to reveal a stunning pair of diamond and emerald earrings. These belonged to Marcus's great-great-grandmother, Charlotte Sterling. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants who married into the family during the 1890s. The parallel was obvious and touching. They're beautiful, I said sincerely. Charlotte faced considerable opposition when she married Marcus's great-great-grandfather, Margaret continued. The family thought she was beneath their station. She went on to modernize their business practices and double their holdings during the First World War. She helped me put on the earrings, her touch surprisingly gentle. I hope you'll forgive my initial resistance to accepting you into the family. I let prejudice cloud my judgment, and that was wrong of me. It was a fuller apology than I had expected, and I was touched by both the gesture and the family history she was sharing. Thank you for telling me about Charlotte. And for trusting me with her earrings. Welcome to the family, Angelina, she said, and for the first time, it sounded like she meant it. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed of, made more meaningful by the knowledge that Marcus and I were entering our marriage as true equals, with families who finally understood and respected our partnership. When Marcus saw me walking down the aisle, the love and pride in his eyes made every moment of conflict worthwhile. Our vows were traditional but felt revolutionary in their honesty. We promised to support each other's dreams, to communicate openly even when it was difficult, and to face the world as partners in every sense of the word. At the reception, I noticed the subtle changes in how the Sterling family and their friends interacted with me. Hamilton introduced me to his business associates as a successful entrepreneur, rather than Marcus's librarian girlfriend. Margaret made sure I was seated next to the most influential women at our table, clearly proud to showcase my accomplishments. Most importantly, Marcus never left my side, making it clear to everyone present that we were a team in every sense that mattered. During our first dance, he whispered in my ear, "I'm proud of you for standing up to them. And I'm proud of us for finding our way through this together." "It was worth it," I whispered back. "All of it. We're stronger now." Our honeymoon in Tuscany was pure bliss, 2 weeks of exploring medieval villages, sampling incredible wine, and planning our future as equal partners. We talked about the boundaries we would maintain with both our families, the charitable work we wanted to do together, and the kind of marriage we wanted to build. 6 months later, those conversations were put to the test when Margaret suggested we join the family for their annual charity gala planning committee. Instead of assuming I would simply write a check, she asked if my technology background might be useful in modernizing their fundraising approaches. Hamilton went even further, inviting me to consult on a sustainable development project the family was considering. He listened to my suggestions with genuine interest and incorporated several of my recommendations into their final proposal. Most significantly, Marcus and I established our own traditions and rhythms as a couple, independent of family expectations. We bought a brownstone in the village that we both loved, decorated it with books and art that reflected our shared interests, and created a home that was truly ours. The prenuptial agreement remained in our safe deposit box, hopefully never to be needed. Its real value had been in forcing us to confront the assumptions and power dynamics that could have poisoned our marriage if left unaddressed. Looking back on that week of confrontation and revelation, I'm grateful for the crisis that forced us to build our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. Those difficult conversations strengthened our partnership in ways that smooth sailing never could have. I learned that hiding parts of yourself, even with good intentions, can create more problems than it solves. Marcus learned to stand up to family pressure when it threatened what truly mattered to him. Together, we discovered that true partnership requires both vulnerability and strength, the courage to show your whole self and the determination to demand the respect you deserve. The Sterling family's initial reaction to me had been based on class prejudice and financial assumptions that said more about their character than mine. When forced to confront the reality of who I actually was, they had a choice: cling to their prejudices or evolve into better people. To their credit, they chose growth. My grandmother's inheritance had given me financial freedom, but her wisdom had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by others' opinions of my background or bank account. Standing up to the Sterlings hadn't been about proving my wealth. It had been about demanding the basic respect that every person deserves. Marriage, I've discovered, isn't just the union of two people but the intersection of two families, two sets of values, and two approaches to navigating the world. Finding harmony requires constant communication, mutual respect, and the willingness to stand firm on core principles while remaining open to growth and change. When faced with that prenuptial ultimatum 5 days before my wedding, I could have simply signed the document to avoid conflict. I could have walked away in anger and hurt. Instead, I chose the harder path of confrontation and truth, not just about my financial situation, but about the kind of marriage and family relationships I was willing to accept. That choice set the tone for our marriage and established my place within the Sterling family as an equal partner to be respected, not a charity case to be managed. It's a choice I would make again without hesitation. Have you ever had to stand up to people who underestimated you based on their assumptions about your background or worth? Did you find the courage to reveal your true strength and demand the respect you deserved? Share your story in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be diminished by others' limited vision of who you are.